You did everything right. You did well in school, spent countless nights sacrificing sleep, partying, and fun, and you were promised it would all pay off on the other side. You got the corporate 9 to 5, but spend all your time commuting, getting ready for work, and really only have a couple of hours to yourself on the weekdays, unless you really want to punish yourself and sacrifice sleep tomorrow, which you keep doing, but even with a full night's sleep, you're still tired all the time. You spend every weekend catching up on chores and being too tired to enjoy your hobbies. There's no end to this in sight. Your Sunday scaries are turning into daily dreads of going to work every day. It's meaningless, and honestly, you're on the edge of a mental breakdown. Is this just adult life?
Sorry, Mrs. Hoganson, but our liability is spelled out in here.
And I'll go ahead and make sure you get another copy of that memo. Okay?
Make a managerial decision. You find this, what would you do?
You probably resonate at least with some of this. There's a lot to unpack here. There's the social pressure of following a traditional, risk-averse route to a career. Get some education, find a stable job, raise a family, something for 40 years, and maybe you can retire, enjoy your hobbies for a few years while your body decomposes and then die. There's the financial pressures of working full-time, 40 hours a week, and still not being able to afford luxuries, or even the bare necessities, living paycheck to paycheck. Unless you're getting a sizable inheritance, the average young adult is not buying a house on their salary alone. Then there's the pressure of the job itself. You're there like your entire day, the majority of it is just boring nonsense, and it's like a dull stream of constant stress and anxiety. You're tired all the time, not just physically, but emotionally. And spiritually, your entire soul is tired. And of course you're tired. You're doing something that you don't like for the whole day. Of course you're bored. You have no time, no money for stuff you actually like doing. And of course you're anxious. You feel trapped in this cycle and everybody is telling you that it's normal and to suck it up like an adult. And you're depressed. You'll never have the life that the 1% get to live, and you do this meaningless work for the next 40 years. Hey besties, this is a day in the life of a 30-year-old office worker. I get out of bed and start the day off with a super healthy breakfast. Oh wait, I forgot groceries were expensive and I didn't get any breakfast stuff. I drink my no-name brand coffee that gives me acid reflux and tell my coworkers I have to work from home today because I don't want to get anybody sick. In reality, my commute is almost an hour and a half in traffic, and sitting next to my coworkers for another 8 hours will push me closer to a mental breakdown. Here's a sped up version of my exciting job that has me staring into a bright screen until the sun goes down. Oh look, the workday is over, so I look for my gym bag because that's where I last put my antidepressants and anxiety medication. I get a text from my friends about a trendy new bar downtown, which sounds fun in theory, but I have work in the morning, have crippling social anxiety, and can't afford to spend $30 on a cocktail. So I instead begin cooking my mediocre meal, eat it while watching Netflix and enjoying a nice glass of wine. And I clean up, do some chores, and prepare leftovers for work tomorrow. Oh look, it's already bedtime. Looks like I have no goddamn time to enjoy my life. I'm so tired of this stupid ass job. Why the hell did I take out student loans for this I then get ready for bed. Then I scroll on my phone to avoid the screams of existential dread that haunt me eternally. I then cry myself to sleep with the grim reality that I have to do this for another 30 to 40 years. On August 14th, 2013, Doreen Ford created a subreddit called r/anti-work, which criticized modern work and eventually grew to, as of making this video, about 2.8 million members. Unfortunately, in 2022, Ford had an interview with Fox News' Jesse Waters that went, oh, well, not so great.
So I would like less work hours.
And what do you do, Doreen?
I'm a dog walker. a dog walker.
Anti-work is a leftist movement, and an interview on Fox was bound to be contentious. It's a big moment for this internet movement. It's an opportunity to introduce millions of people, a general audience that isn't on the internet much and certainly doesn't hang around leftist groups, to be introduced to and be convinced of this anti-work movement. Doreen Ford is a trans woman with no media training and seemingly very little preparation. This interview reinforced a lot of prejudices about anti-work. There are a bunch of weird internet kids whining about working because they're lazy, entitled, and haven't worked hard for anything in their life. It's interesting how political movements can lose their legitimacy so fast if they're seen as cringe. Like fedora wearing neckbeards and new atheism, or J.D. Vance having sex with a couch and conservatives getting called weird. Anyway, despite the poor public launch, the anti-work subreddit clearly resonates with a lot of people. Something's going wrong with modern work, and more people are unhappy. These people aren't lazy, entitled, or delusional. They're the working class, and they have legitimate concerns. The US in particular has a lot of wage stagnation, high job turnover, and a lot of job insecurity. People have abusive bosses, long work hours for low pay, and toxic work environments. Jobs have weird corporate cultures, are devoid of meaning, and leave us with little or no time or energy to live the rest of our lives. Now, you can always say that it could be worse. There's always going to be people working more for less and being even more oppressed. Or you can just stick your head in the sand and say, that's just how work is. Work is work. It's not fun. Grow up. But work is such a fundamental part of people's lives that it's probably worth looking into these issues. There seems to be something broken with work in the modern world that's making a lot of people unhappy. How did we get here? Here's this super short history. In the 17th and 18th and 19th century, a bunch of nerds hopped up on coffee, started making governments more stable, which led to more stable economies. This was the Enlightenment. More free time and smarter people led to cool machines like the steam engine, the spinning jenny, and the power loom. These machines sped up production and led to the Industrial Revolution. The people in factories worked long hours because of some Protestant work ethic or Catholic guilt. And this led to a rise in capitalist ideologies of linking personal worth to productivity and economic output. Hashtag grind, hashtag no days off, hashtag money. The economy boomed and people got rich. And in the 20th century, there was a rise in what's called the American dream. The rag to riches stories to further perpetuate productivity in the working class. But most industrial jobs were working long hours, often 6 to 7 days a week, and people weren't too happy about this. So labor movements arose with unions and workers' rights advocates. There was a global movement advocating for 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of recreation. But a key figure in this movement was the original pickup truck douche, Henry Ford. In 1926, he implemented the 9 to 5, 5 days a week approach. Like most corporate acts of charity, it was really for selfish reasons. He wanted his workers to be more productive, and he thought maybe giving them rest would do that. And he thought that giving them leisure time would mean that they would have more time to buy his cars. And he finally wanted to shut up those pesky labor movement people. Capitalism at its finest, people. Then the war happened. People came back traumatized, and there was a focus on consumerism and using work to buy nice things. The peaceful suburban life made these former soldiers loyal to companies, and they defined their new identities as working company men. They passed on these norms of work and stability, along with their unresolved war trauma, to their boomer children, who kept the gears of capitalism turning, and they reaped the benefits of buying houses for like $1, paying student debt by washing dishes, and getting a job by shaking the hands of random CEOs. This was when capitalism peaked, and then things got worse and worse as it entered into the late stages of capitalism, as we are in today. Now we have hustle culture amplified by social media. Being more productive means getting ahead, getting more money, and getting ahead. You need to work beyond your 9 to 5. You want to break free from the 9 to 5? The key is more work. You don't like your job? Work harder and more to get another one. You want more free time? Work more to get more free time. We're addicted to the idea that more work will make us successful, but all more work has done is made us more burnt out, depressed, and anxious. Then a global pandemic hit. It was scary, especially when everybody was sent home for lockdown and nobody knew what was going on. But it gave every stressed out worker a break from work. It gave them a chance to think about their life, their career, and what they really wanted in the future. It gave workers a chance to reflect on their life, their career, and what they want in their future, which was bad news for the employers who are hoping to keep you so busy and tired that you don't think about these things. In early 2021, during COVID, people started to voluntarily resign from their jobs. Anthony Klotz coined this term, the Great Resignation. The highest number of resignations came from Millennials and Gen Zs. It was beautiful. Like a good old-fashioned labor strike, it was a mass protest against burnout and modern work culture. Unfortunately, the gears of capitalism kept turning. The people who quit struggled to find better jobs, and the boom in automation and AI led to replacing workers to reduce labor costs. But even after COVID and even with hybrid work, jobs still sucked. I'm sure social media and modern isolation are a huge factor, but modern work culture does so much to aggravate mental illness. The stress, the lack of time to sleep, exercise, eat right, or see a therapist, the substance abuse to cope, the financial pressures of trying to survive on a tiny salary. No wonder everyone's depressed and anxious. Now, around the time of the Great Resignation in China, Tang Ping became very popular. It's a slang term in Chinese that translates roughly to lying flat. This was another movement that was sparked by an internet post by Lu Haozang. Essentially, he quit his dead-end job, spent his time cycling, reading philosophy, and doing odd jobs to survive. In China, the work culture is probably even worse. They have a 996, which is the norm, where you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It's technically illegal, but who's really going around scolding companies in China for working too hard? Now, Tang Ping means lowering your professional and economic ambitions just to live a simple life, to meet essential needs and prioritize psychological health. And this inspired another movement in the US, quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is such an interesting phenomenon. You can't quit your job because you need the money to survive, so maybe the next best thing is to do the bare minimum at the job. No going above and beyond, no volunteering for more work. Just set your boundaries, do the minimum work to stay employed, and then enjoy the rest of your life. Quiet quitting falls under a larger category in labor movements called the work to rule, which is kind of a striking tactic without actually striking. The Italians called this sciopero bianco, or white strike, where employees do the bare minimum in their contract and be super petty about following rules and wasting time. In 1969 to 1970, what was called Hot Autumn or Hot Italian Boy Fall, Italian factory workers were using this work to rule tactic, and they would insist on wearing full protective gear and conducting every single safety inspection. If you've ever worked in a factory before, people skip a lot of safety stuff unless it's really dangerous, because it takes forever otherwise. And if you did everything by the book, nothing would ever get done. This was the whole point. They would take breaks and leave their stations exactly when their shift ended, and this caused incomplete products to pile up on production lines. They would make sure every piece of paperwork was perfectly documented and completed at the slowest possible rate to create more backlog. They would point out the smallest defects and log minor issues. They essentially weaponized bureaucracy. It was beautiful. It's like a form of malicious compliance, or complying with an order knowing it will have negative results. Honestly, I personally love these stories, so here are some more. Austrian postal workers normally accept without weighing all items that are obviously not overweight, but during a dispute, they took every piece of mail and weighed it, took it back, and by the second day, their office was crammed with unweighted mail. French air traffic controllers started filing mandatory weather reports every few minutes, following outdated regulations to the T. It caused air traffic control systems to be overwhelmed with weather updates. It delayed flights, and pilots sarcastically thanked the controllers for keeping them informed of every cloud in the sky. Firefighters protesting budget cuts in the US drove fire trucks to all official duties, including grocery stores and picking up takeout for the firehouse. They argued that they needed to always be prepared in case of an emergency. I think I'm gonna quiet quit. I think you're a bad person for that. You made an agreement, a promise with your company. They give you a job and this is how you treat them? My job isn't my friend. They'd lay me off and replace me and have no remorse about it. I'll still do enough of my job to not get fired and maybe milk the paycheck until they do fire me. That's not right. Aren't you taking advantage of them by just juicing them for a salary? Aren't they the ones taking advantage of me? They're the ones profiting massively off of global capitalism and my labor. Every dollar they pay me is probably making them 10 times. And I don't see any of that. It's hard to think I'm the powerful and manipulator in this situation when they're the multi-billion-dollar corporation. Look, they took the risk of creating that corporation and they're getting rewarded for that in a free market. Is it really a fair agreement? When we live in a society that if we don't agree to have a job, you're out in the streets, it seems more like economic duress with extra steps. We live in a democratic society and you agree to it in principle by just being a part of it. No one's forcing you to be here. It sounds like you're just a sore loser in this game of capitalism. Wouldn't you say our current late-stage capitalist society is more of an oligarchy? I'm just trying to empower myself and reclaim some of the autonomy back from my employer. If they don't like it and think I broke some agreement, they can fire me. Yeah, but aren't you screwing over your coworkers that have to pick up your slack? Where's your care for them, man? They shouldn't have to pick up my extra work, and they should adamantly refuse to do so. Collective punishment is a war crime. If they knew what was good for them, they would quiet quit too. Grow up, you hippie. You're not some political revolutionary for quiet quitting. Yeah, I'm looking out for myself. And I don't want to work for a job that I hate for 8 hours a day. Life's too short for that. But self-interested goals that align a lot of people are kind of how a lot of political movements happen, like union workers and wanting to protect their own economic interests. I hope you get fired. I think you're just lazy and you don't want to work. I agree. And you're brainwashed by a Protestant work ethic embedded in the structures of global capitalism. I hope your hours of climbing the corporate ladder instead of spending time with your loved ones or developing hobbies pays off enough so that you can exploit enough of the labor below you to satisfy your own delusional greed for capital. Why exactly does modern work suck so much? And by work, I mean the dirty work we often have to do to trade time for money to survive. The employment, the jobs, the careers, or whatever common sense notion you want to use. Maybe it's the working conditions. On the grand scheme, the 9-to-5 corporate work environment isn't so bad, right? It's safer than working in a mine, it's less physically demanding than a sweatshop. But we said we're not going to play the game of comparison here because somebody is always going to have it worse. Working in a tiny office or cubicle for most of the waking day, in a chair in front of a computer, honestly isn't great for your mind or body. Your job also isn't secure and maybe AI will replace you one day. And if you're in a minority group, you probably face discrimination, microaggressions, and other awful things in the workplace. Even if you're not, you might not have a lot of upward growth unless you switch jobs constantly. You also have to deal with office politics, management, and the constant surveillance and scrutiny in the workplace. You also don't get paid a lot, and wages have stagnated for a while. Now let's focus on the money point for a bit. There's a term called wage slavery, which critiques the systemic exploitation inherent in wage-based employment, emphasizing the dependence of workers on wages for survival. You can't really quit your job or else you'll be homeless and hungry. And it's not really a fair choice, and there's unequal bargaining power between employer and worker. Now, slavery is a charged word, but wage slavery has been an idea since antiquity. Cicero, for instance, likened wage labor to a form of servitude, emphasizing its restrictive and dehumanizing nature. We're under the persistent threat of poverty, so we really have little control over our work conditions. We're not farmers anymore, the original entrepreneurs. #grind. We can't grow our own food and survive off the land. We're dependent on large corporations to give us money to buy food and homes. We have to obey their rules of professionalism, obey their schedules, and ensure we prioritize their goals over our own families, our own hobbies, our own freedom. A bit dramatic? Maybe. But Friedrich Nietzsche critiqued the glorification of relentless work for obstructing personal development and reason. He described work as a mechanism that keeps everybody in harness and powerfully obstructs the development of reason, of covetousness, of the desire for independence. I often like to sprinkle in a little bit of Nietzsche to connect with the youth of the day. Friedrich Lordan, in The Willing Slaves of Capital, argues that individuals often internalize organizational goals at the expense of their own desires, and they effectively surrender their autonomy to economic systems. This surrender reflects a psychological compartmentalization where workers become willing slaves. They align their goals not with their own, but with their employer. We become tools, corporate drones. Our own work persona takes over us. In Dan Erickson's Severance, we're introduced to the employees of Lumen Industries who perform a sci-fi brain procedure called severance that divides the consciousness of employees into two, the innie and the outie. The innie is the employee with all the memories erased so that they have a new person entirely that exists only within the workplace and has no memory or recollection of outside life. The outie is the normal person before the procedure that lives the life outside and knows nothing about what happens inside the job. Every time the outie goes to work, the innie activates in the elevator. It's a split consciousness. To the innie, life is always work. To the outie, life is always outside work. If you're somebody like John Locke who believes personal identity or what makes you who you are is tied to your memories, then this procedure essentially makes two people sharing one body. This show dives into the concept of wage slavery, and the innie and outie is a metaphor for the extreme psychological compartmentalization and alienation workers feel in the corporate environment. The innies exist to serve the employers and work all of the time. Their life is work. They're essentially enslaved by their outies to do so. The innies have no lives, no autonomy, no personal development. The work that they do is also obscure and mundane. They're essentially tortured if they're disobedient. Now we find out that the innies are told that they can cancel the procedure if the outie agrees to do so. But again, this choice is illusory. One of the innies tries to do this, but the outie refuses. The outie needs the innie to continue working to ensure that the outies can keep living their lives, succeeding, coping in the outside world. The innie grows contemptuous of the outie. With no memories of the outside culture of capitalism and the outie's perspective on prioritizing economic progress, the innies can't fathom the idea of being subjugated or that anything would be worth giving up freedom and autonomy. There's a fragmentation of our identity in the modern corporate workplace. I can't be myself. I can't spend time with the people I really want to, and I don't really care about increasing shareholder profits or making the company clients happy. Now, some workplaces are so awful that I really feel like I need to disassociate as soon as I enter work. I have to be this amiable, professional instrument that represents the face of a company, and it's so far from who I actually am that I have to suppress my actual self for most of my waking life. Okay, therapy session over. Upon request, I can also perform a hug. The critique of work as a cultural and economic construct challenges the deeply rooted assumption about its role in human flourishing. In The Right to Be Lazy, Lafargue argues that labor or work is a source of alienation and degradation. He draws on Greek ideals where labor was relegated to slaves while free citizens pursued intellectual and leisurely activities. He argued that modern workers have been indoctrinated into valuing work at the expense of their well-being. Thinkers in this camp highlight the idea that work erodes autonomy and joy, and they advocate for a cultural shift towards pleasure and self-determination over productivity. Conceiving ourselves primarily as workers leads to a sort of instrumental stance on ourselves and others as human agents, in which we come to view ourselves purely as resources for production or sites of consumption. The philosophical roots of this critique stretch back to the cynics of ancient Greek, with figures like Diogenes rejecting social norms that equated human worth with material achievement or labor. Bertrand Russell's In Praise of Idleness argues that societal progress isn't rooted in relentless labor, but in the cultivation of leisure. Leisure is different from work because you enjoy it for the value it brings to you and not some objective value for everybody else. You can't hire somebody to generate that subjective value. You have to be the one to watch the movie. You can't hire somebody to watch the movie for you. You have to go on the walk or whatever. He goes on to argue that the veneration of work has eroded our appreciation of the value of leisure and idleness. The social cachet of work can end up warping our moral relationship to ourselves, treating ourselves not as intrinsically valuable but as mere instruments of production. Russell challenges the moralization of work, arguing that technological advancements could reduce working hours, enabling individuals to pursue leisure and intellectual fulfillment. He suggests that modern glorification of work enslaves individuals to survival-driven productivity, crowding out opportunities for reflection, innovation, and self-expression. He envisions a society where reduced working hours would eliminate unemployment and enhance collective happiness, and allow people to pursue these intellectual and creative pursuits. This perspective reframes idleness as a condition of freedom and as an integral part to realizing human potential and flourishing. These views aren't popular, and there's a lot of pushback, especially since work ethic and equating work with moral and social worth is so ingrained in our historical narrative. Throughout history, those who deviated from traditional employment have faced harsh condemnations. During Nazi Germany, individuals labeled as work-shy were persecuted, while in today's society, we have derogatory labels like slacker, welfare queen, or parasite single, and it reflects the anxieties about dependency and productivity. But it's important to understand that idleness or pursuing leisure is not promoting stagnation. It's really about advocating for a radical reimagining of social values and prioritizing human flourishing over the relentless demands of productivity and capitalism. Idleness and leisure are trying to be reclaimed as essential conditions for creativity, self-determination, and well-being. I don't think work is essentially bad, but like Bob Black argues, forced labor or compulsory production is the source of nearly all misery in the world. We're forced to work because we need to in order to not be on the streets and go hungry. If all our needs were met, we'd be doing work that helps us and our community thrive. We'd be serving the community, helping the young, sick, disabled, teaching, giving us and those around us purpose. Work can be definitely a source of a lot of good, just not the kind of work that we have in our society. Now, I have to add one more critique of work that's probably the most influential and combines various critiques of work into a single unified theory. That's right, Reddit anti-work. No, Marx and Marxism and critiques of work under capitalism. Karl Marx, communist extraordinaire, critiques work under capitalism in terms of exploitation, which he views as a structural feature of all class-based societies. But unlike feudalism or slavery, exploitation under capitalism takes a particularly disguised and pervasive form. He understands exploitation as a systemic process tied to the organization of production, private property, and the wage labor system. He understands value in terms of labor, meaning that the value of a commodity corresponds to the socially necessary labor time required for its production. In capitalist economies, workers don't receive the full value of what they produce. Instead, they're compensated with a wage that covers only a portion of their labor's value. And it's important to understand that this process isn't accidental or just because people are greedy. It's a feature of capitalism itself. The workers lack ownership of the means of production, the factories, tools, machinery, and raw materials. And they have to sell their labor power to survive. For example, in a factory setting, workers might produce goods worth, say, $500 a day, but the wage they amount to is only $100. The difference, $400, constitutes the surplus value captured by the capitalists in power. This fundamental asymmetry forces workers to accept terms offered by capitalists under conditions where the alternatives, unemployment or destitutions, are really just untenable. So while capitalist labor markets appear to operate through free and consensual exchange, Marx argues that the economic compulsion to sell one's labor renders genuine freedom illusory. The result is a systemic and disguised form of exploitation that perpetuates inequality and concentrates wealth. Although Marx recognizes that all class societies, the slavery or feudalist systems, expropriate surplus labor from working classes, capitalism distinguishes itself by making this exploitation appear voluntary. For instance, a medieval serf might visibly labor under the coercion of a feudal lord, but the capitalist laborer signs a contract that conceals the underlying economic compulsion. This illusion of freedom is perpetuated through ideological mechanisms that normalize wage labor and privatize property. For instance, the promise of upward mobility, the idealization of meritocracy, encourages workers to view their circumstances as a result of individual effort rather than systemic constraints. Moreover, consumerism distracts workers from their exploitation by emphasizing material acquisition as a marker of success. In this way, capitalism masks its inherent inequalities and sustains the illusion of free and fair exchange. Now, another central concept for Marx is alienation. While exploitation describes the economic process by which capitalists appropriate surplus value, alienation focuses on the social and experiential consequences on the workers themselves. In Marx's view, alienation under capitalism manifests in four ways. Alienation from the product of labor, so workers don't own what they produce. For example, an assembly line worker manufacturing cars will never own or enjoy the fruits of their own labor. The products belong to the capitalists in power. Second, alienation from the act of labor. Work becomes a monotonous means to earn wages devoid of intrinsic fulfillment. These tasks are often repetitive, de-skilled, and it stifles creativity and self-expression. The third is alienation from other workers. Capitalism fosters competition rather than cooperation. It pits workers against another for jobs, promotions, and this dynamic erodes solidarity and prevents collective action. Finally, alienation from human potential. Repetition and narrowly defined paths prevent workers from realizing their intellectual capacities and creativity. Their broader humanity is underdeveloped. For Marx, this alienation dehumanizes workers, and it reduces them to instruments of productions rather than autonomous beings capable of creative and meaningful work. Alienation thus underscores the broader human costs of capitalist exploitation, not only economic equality, but also estrangement from individuals from their own potential. What's most interesting about Marx's theory is that although exploitation has existed through history in various forms, feudal lords extracting surplus value from serfs, slave owners profiting from enslaved labor, capitalism, Marx argues, introduces a unique form of free labor. The overt coercion is replaced by economic dependence. Workers appear to have freedom, but this choice is overshadowed by the reality that they have to sell their labor to survive.
Everything is fine. Just relax and focus on the real issues. Forget about socioeconomic inequalities, because there aren't any. We're all doing well. There are no oligarchs hoarding wealth and power, just benevolent billionaires who love politics and want to defend the sacred free market for all of our benefits. Our system isn't rigged. It's designed to be fair and equal for everyone. Our legal system, impartial and just. Our politicians, tirelessly working day and night to put your needs ahead of their own, free from influence, self-interest, or corporate funding. Everything is fine. We care about our essential workers, our teachers, our future. While they complain about living wages, healthcare, and workplace protection, we celebrate them with words of gratitude and positive public relations. Our healthcare system is efficient and affordable. We prioritize your health over corporate profit. That's why nobody ever goes bankrupt over medical bills. Everything is fine. We care for Earth, nature, and protecting the environment. There's no need to worry about climate change or resource depletion. Everything is under control. There is no income disparity. Billionaires are the hardest working people in the world, and we take care of all of our workers. Everybody can afford a home. Things aren't expensive. People aren't underpaid. You're too busy to think about these things anyway. We've got it all figured out. Corporations, they don't have too much power or influence. They're selfless entities devoted to serving the people and improving your life. If you just keep working and work hard enough, everybody will win. So go ahead, embrace capitalism now. Don't ask questions. Don't look too closely. Don't think about who owns what, who makes decisions, or where all the money is going. Everything is fine. You're fine. This is fine. This message was brought to you in part by capitalism.
So, what do? Maybe we hope it works itself out. Maybe AI will take over the monotonous, dangerous, or repetitive tasks. Maybe this will give room for progressive change like 4-day work weeks or more flexible hours. Research from organizations adopting shorter work weeks reveal a range of benefits, including increased productivity, better mental health, and enhanced work-life balance. Or maybe a universal basic income is the answer. A guaranteed income to all individuals so everybody can have some level of financial security. But I'm not hopeful. It would upset the corporations, which would upset the billionaires, which would upset politicians, which means it probably won't happen. Maybe the answer is you really do have to work even harder to win at the game of capitalism for financial freedom. Maybe you just gotta pray for a windfall of money. Hope you marry rich, play the lottery, become an entrepreneur, or maybe you just need to get lucky and find a humble job that you actually enjoy, maybe even work it part-time. Maybe live on the border of poverty with general life contentment. Or, keep the corporate job, keep doing what you're doing, and look within. Keep pushing the boulder, Sisyphus, and just try to be happy. Capitalism and the shape of our work culture is just another absurdity in life and another one of life's inherent struggles. Maybe you just need to derive meaning in the struggle itself and just keep pushing, keep swimming. Maybe the soul-sucking aspect of work is why New Age spirituality is so in these days. Practice mindfulness or gratitude. Read some stoicism and roleplay as some Greco-Roman instead of being some nerd in a Patagonia vest. Must distinguish what you can and cannot control and have inner tranquility over external circumstances. And then take a Zoloft and go on a bender. Or find Jesus, you heathen bastards. Again, I blame the church and their stupid church morality of a Protestant work ethic thinking you can work your way to making your father love you. Cue Freud. Religion can definitely soften the drudgery of a corporate world if you think your administrative job is part of some higher calling. If you couldn't tell from my tone, I don't agree that the corrupt forms of work we find under capitalism is super conducive to Christian spiritual development, and I think it actually amplifies vices like envy, pride, or greed, or gluttony. Being a hard worker is considered a virtue in this society, but we should work at being better people, work at loving others, and regularly rest and enjoy life. If you're sacrificing any of these for more money, social status, or just the inertia of following what our capitalist culture pushes on you, maybe you need to figure out who you are. Here's another quote from Paul Lafargue. He wrote, "A strange delusion possesses the working class of the nations where capitalist civilization holds its sway. This delusion is the love of work. Instead of opposing this mental aberration, the priests, the economists, and the moralists have cast a sacred halo over work. Blind and finite men, they have wished to be wiser than their God. Weak and contemptible men, they have presumed to rehabilitate what their God has cursed. The number one deathbed regret is this. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. The number two regret is this. I wish I hadn't worked so hard."
Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living.
Is this just adult life? Is there anything more to this? Thanks for listening.